Hello, I'd like to welcome you to Steps and Strategies for Disability Inclusion at your institution. I'm Donna Maywar. I'm Assistant Director for Equity Compliance in the Provost Office at Princeton University. I'm also lead of the ERG Employee Resource Group Disability Alliance at Princeton, an ERG for employees who identify with having a disability and their allies. I'll be your moderator today, but let's meet our panel. So we have James Emmett, Lead Workplace Strategist from Understood, Kathy Petkauskos from Director of Work Without Limits at UMass Medical School, and John Robinson, CEO, Our Ability Disability in New York. So let's start with James. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself and let us get to know you a little bit?
You bet, and thanks for having me. So again, my name is James Emmett. I am the lead workplace strategist for Understood. Understood is an organization that's been around since 2014 with really the focus on helping what we call the 1 in 5 individuals that are out there with learning and thinking differences. We do that through a variety of strategies, including a workplace initiative that I am the lead strategist for, but also if you go to understood.org, you'll see information for parents and for individuals. And really the focus of Understood is to, founded by Fred Postis and Nancy Postis, really try to shape the world for what we call difference, right? And so I really think that kind of leads into the topics for the panel today. And I'm excited to be on the panel and really to think about for the universities that are watching, really start to think about the concept of disclosure, inclusion. I know we'll talk a little bit more about disclosure in the questions, but I think one of the key things that I'd like to highlight is the incredible talent that's out there in the world, especially of folks who have invisible disabilities, right? Those folks with learning disabilities, those folks with ADHD, those folks with autism, right? These are immense talent pools for the universities and to help us think about all the positions and the needs that you have currently. And so I think it's really important as we discuss the concept of disclosure and self-identification to recognize the fact that, right, the estimates are 1 in 4 Americans have a disability, right? And of those 65 million Americans, 70% of those folks have an invisible disability, right? 70% of those folks, I have a physical disability, but 70% of those folks. So this is a group of immense talent, those folks with invisible disabilities. And we're starting to move into the concept, we're seeing the concept of neurodiversity, right? More and more the term is neurodiversity, of bringing folks in to your university setting who think differently, right? Who look at problems differently, right? Or one of the things that I like to talk a lot about with the companies that we work with and that I've had the pleasure of working with is a lot of times I think part of building diversity from a disability inclusion standpoint is bringing in people who will run at problems, not run away from problems, right? And I think as individuals with disabilities, we're kind of prone to going at those barriers and figuring out ways to solve problems. And I think that contribution to each university's diversity is really something to think about in terms of recruiting talent and building your talent pipeline specifically, and also leading to that disclosure issue we'll talk about more. I think the couple things I would just kind of highlight, and when you think about folks with invisible disabilities, and for the folks who are watching this who are from HR and diversity in the universities, sometimes we have to think about how we screen and onboard individuals, right? No matter what the position is, sometimes we're seeing more and more, we do a lot of training with our companies on what we call inclusive interviewing, right? So things like maybe a person with autism, a candidate with autism who comes in, this is a new environment, they may not give a ton of eye contact, right, in that specific interview. So you as an HR person is going to write down, maybe this person is disinterested. not really looking for this job, right? Kind of approaching it that way. And that may not be the situation at all. The person may be your best candidate, but they may not be expressing it in that context, right? So thinking about the ways that we build our inclusive interviewing, from basic tips to bring in talent who may approach that initial screen a little bit differently than what we're traditionally used to in a university setting. So we can definitely dive into that more. And then I kind of close with, I think we've been talking a lot with the companies and the colleagues I work with, is especially in a remote virtual work environment, what is inclusion, right? Especially from a disability standpoint, what does that look like? If we have 3 people on a Zoom call and one person has a disability, is that inclusion? What are the numbers? I'm sitting here by myself, you're sitting there by yourself, but we're seeing each other on screens. How do we define even workplace inclusion anymore, and especially from a disability standpoint? So I think that can be part of some of the discussions moving forward and beyond this panel with some of the university folks. So thank you for having me. And Donna, I look forward to talking more.
Okay, thank you, James. So Kathy, can you tell us about yourself and your work?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Thank you so much. So my name is Kathy Petkauskos, and I am the Director of Work Without Limits. Work Without Limits is an initiative out of the University of Massachusetts Medical School. We sit within Commonwealth Medicine, which is the consulting arm of the medical school. And we are a network of employers and businesses, state agencies, employment service providers, higher education, and individuals with disabilities and family members. And our goal is equal employment of people with disabilities. Work Without Limits provides a lot of different types of capacity building services. Basically, we work very closely with businesses to help them to build their internal capacity to be good employers, if you will, of people with disabilities. So we provide training and education, we provide information and resources, and we do a lot of networking type of activities to help connect disability inclusive employers with job-seeking candidates with disabilities, as well as with the employment service providers that help to support those individuals to go to work. So that's who we are, that's what we do. I would like to thank the HERC organization for really focusing in on this topic at this time. It's very heartwarming, if you will, to see that. There's a lot going in our world right now. There's a lot of things that we could be focusing on. So to bring the focus to this topic, I just want to say that it's, just very, very appreciative. I think that with so much going on in the world, it's could be easy for us to be distracted from our goal of equal employment for people with disabilities, and we don't want to do that. It is the 75th annual National Disability Employment Awareness Month in October, so thank you for holding it in this month as well, although this is airing in November. And it's also the 30th anniversary of the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act, but there is still a lot of work that needs to be done to help to increase employers' access to the incredible talents that people with disability holds, and that includes higher education. You're always looking for that talent. Over the years and the decades since the passage of the ADA, we have seen meaningful job gains for people with disabilities. And then, of course, this year, with the pandemic hitting, we've seen unemployment rates skyrocket. For everybody, and that includes people with disabilities. And people with disabilities tend to be disproportionately affected. But I also think it's worth remembering not too long ago that we saw a similar thing happen between 2007, 2009 with the Great Recession. And after that time, employment rates did rebound and more gains, were made for people with disabilities. So I think that focusing, programming, education, raising awareness around this topic at the time, even though things may be challenging right now, I think it's also a reminder for us to carry on, persevere, push through, and help all of us to get to the other side as well, without sort of, losing our focus on the goal. So those are kind of just some things I wanted to share this morning in my introductions, and look forward to hearing from others and to your questions going forward. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Kathy. John, would you introduce yourself and tell us about your work?
John Robinson, President, CEO of Our Ability. Our Ability is an organization that's business-led, business-driven to build employment for individuals with disabilities. I started this about 10 years ago myself as a way to answer a question that I had a generation ago. I graduated Syracuse University with a degree in television, radio, film in 1990. And while it's the same year the ADA was written, and in theory, the world should have been ready for me to come out and get a job, the truth is the world wasn't ready. And I was unemployed for 4.5 years, even though I interviewed at TV stations and radio stations all over the Northeast of the United States and Canada. I'm very lucky in that I did get a job in my chosen field and had a good 16-year career. But as the television career was escalating and doing really well, at the same time, I was meeting a lot of other individuals with disabilities that struggled in finding employment. So that really framed with me an opportunity. And so left high-paying job and started this organization. We're very similar to Work Without Limits in some ways, and then different in some. We do have a network of businesses that we work with directly to do training, to do recruiting, to talk about disability inclusion and networking. And so we're really proud of that work that we do. But we also have an online portal, and knowing that we couldn't be brick and mortar and we couldn't be everywhere at once, about 8 years ago, we invested a lot of money, quite frankly, into building a portal where individuals with disabilities could tell us who they are. And then the companies that we work with, we could scrape jobs. And that portal has been steadily growing nationally and regionally with some of the partnerships that we have around the United States and soon to be Canada and the United Kingdom. What is changing, which is really exciting, is that we are taking advantage of the explosion of technology, both with mobile technology in our phones and tablets and computer, but also in artificial learning, machine learning and artificial intelligence. We've gotten involved in the last 18 months with Syracuse University's Information Technology School and Microsoft's AI for Good program to do a better job in integrating people with disabilities into our system. And so we're using machine learning to do a better job in identifying individual skills, getting people to respond to the information that we're asking them for, and then to process that through machine learning and come up with a career path. We're really excited about the technology we've developed. It's unique in the world. People are watching us, so I kind of feel like the little engine that could, to some degree, in some of the meetings we've had in the last 6 months. But it can be a game changer in the disability space and put us on par with some of the other organizations that deal with employment nationally, some of the names that you've heard before. So we're really excited about that. It all starts from the fact that I was unemployed for 4.5 years and I wanted a job, and I didn't want the job necessarily. I wanted the family that I could afford because of the job that I had, the house that I could afford because of the job that I had, the pickup truck that I could drive, and the dogs that I could get. That was what I wanted. And that personal experience for me, being a person with a disability, I realize I'm not alone. And as James said, 1 in 4, 1 in 5, whatever the number is, we're not alone. We're a strong, vibrant group of people. We are quiet at times. We shouldn't be. And yet, in the United States alone, we have $1 trillion in buying power ourselves. And yet we're 70% unemployed. So we need to do a better job. And so that's why we exist. That's why Our Ability exists. That's why I do what I do. I will also echo what Kathy said. Kathy's one of my heroes in this, so I'm going to try to embarrass her as much as I can in the next little while. But I will echo what Kathy said. We've had a long-term relationship with HERC, specifically the New York chapter. We personally, our ability has done a lot of work in the education space in New York State. We're proud of that. Just recently, just this week, a comment was made to me by a major university that said, you know, boy, the work that you're doing externally with businesses, we should be doing internally inside our school. And I thought, that's exactly what I want to hear. Yes, you should. And I'm glad to be a small part of this meeting.
Thank you, John. So I'm going to go right into the questions. And as you all were speaking, you kind of led to some of the answers for this question. But the first question is, what advice do you have for hiring managers to encourage people to disclose and self-identify hidden disabilities? And I want to start with you, James, because you did mention hidden disabilities. So do you have advice for hiring managers to encourage people to disclose and self-identify hidden disabilities?
So I think this is just such an interesting topic these days, right? In terms of self-disclosure, and especially early on in the job interview, right? And so I think that the key here is for everybody. So me having a physical disability, I disclose wherever I go, right? And so it's a much different journey, right, for folks with invisible disabilities than my own. But I think what we hear is that a lot of folks with invisible disabilities often don't disclose for fear of being stigmatized, for fear of being judged as I am less than the candidates that are also applying with me, right? And so I think and everybody's individual. Everybody has and that's not the only reason, clearly, but that's one of the general reasons. And we always want to respect everybody's individual's right to disclose or not. But to encourage that disclosure, I think it really requires that university inviting, right, creating an atmosphere where there's clear messaging that we welcome and value people with disabilities, right? And that doesn't necessarily even just start in the interview, right? One statement in the interview of, you know, about your disability inclusion efforts or whatever, that's probably not right. Disclosure and encouraging both candidates and employees to disclose, in my opinion, starts with each university building loud and proud messaging about valuing the people with disabilities, valuing students with disabilities, about providing that, and that we encourage and want leaders with disabilities. So for me, it cuts all back to kind of the bigger picture messaging, and then allowing that to then come down into the interviews about being able to describe our ERG or describe some of the campaigns that we have at the university about disability value, or describe some of the advocacy groups we have on campus related to disability, right? So I think it's part of getting people to disclose, starting the interview all the way through, is part of some of that bigger strategy. I know we'll talk about ERGs, but that's just kind of my take on it.
Okay, thank you, James. And John, I see you nodding your head. And one of the items that you mentioned in your intro is, you know, that the community is strong, vibrant, and quiet. What do you have to add to, you know, how do we get people to self-disclose?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think the first step that you have to do is exactly what James said. The more that you point out the groups on campus, see, universities and colleges are at a great advantage over maybe corporate America, because your consumers are a diverse population as well. And so you get to show off your consumers, i.e. your students and your alumni, in a way with their diversity that can then help translate into employment. And that's completely unique in the world. You know, the work that we do at Lowe's Home Improvement, yes, there are consumers with disabilities, me included, but you know, they're in and out. They're not there 24/7, right? So the more you can highlight the disability advocacy group and the career services that deal with students with disabilities, that translates into a more welcoming environment throughout your employment scenario. If I were to go to work at a university or college, I would look for a strong disability group on campus among the students to know that does follow throughout the university. I think we're really good in that, and you guys are really good in the way, because there is a better opportunity to be a more inclusive society on a college campus. And so that's great, right? That's a wonderful thing. You just need to highlight it, show it, have programming that supports it. have language around it inside your internal and external messaging that highlight it, and then that will translate through into your hiring. The more, what is true in corporate America and I would say a college university setting, the more you talk about disability openly and quietly, the better off you're going to be. That don't hide it, talk about it. Be inclusive in your language, because I'm paying attention when I apply for a job or when I become a student, right? I want to find out where I'm welcome. And so the more you can talk about that, the better. I say that we're quiet, even though we're a vibrant community. The truth is we are quiet. We're a young diversity category. The ADA is only 30 years old. The truth of the matter is I'm 51 years old, that I'm lucky that I got a public education early and then was able to go to Syracuse University. If I had been 65 years old, I'd be in an institution and I wouldn't have had the opportunities that I do have because I'm a quadruple amputee. People would have looked at me as a child and said I was not worthy, even though I have a brain to some degree. I'm a quad amputee. I walk funny. I look funny. I would have been institutionalized if I were 65. If I were 100 right now, I would have been dead. I would have been drowned out in the backyard behind the barn. And I know that. And so we have to understand we're young in our diversity space. We've all too often been quiet because we think we need to be. But if you watch, social media especially, you notice we're becoming more loud, more open. You see hashtags around disability, which are great, access chat, encrypt the vote, that we're getting more vocal, and that's a good thing. And so from a campus standpoint, from an employment standpoint, listen, be aware of what's going on, and then lean into it in your language, which will help your consumers, your students, and it will also help your future recruiting.
Thanks, John. And Kathy, do you have anything to add? I noticed that you mentioned the incredible talents within the disability community. How do we get them to disclose, and how do, John and James talked about leaning in, making sure that they understand what's available to them. What's your take on it?
Well, I agree with both James and John in that it's very important for organizations to have clear, consistent messaging from the top, and that there is a lot of discussion around it. I don't know so much that it's up to the hiring manager to encourage their employees to self-disclose or to self-identify as a person with a disabilities, as much as it is for them to support the corporate policies and practices of the organization. So I think the more that we can have opportunity for discussion and to talk about this, maybe current employees who have been successful at the organization, who maybe does have a disability. I think the question was kind of wrapped around hidden disabilities. Might want to talk about how the organization helped to support them from the beginning, from the application process through their career advancement, so that others can see that and hear that and feel more comfortable that they're able to do that in a safe environment as well. Because I do think that people are fearful. If I do disclose, I'm going to be passed over for that promotion. I'm not going to be given the next great project to work on. That sometimes happens in the workplace. And I think we need to turn that around and see disability as an advantage and as a desirable qualification for employment and for what people bring to the table, life experiences, perspectives, and many talents and skills that can be an advantage in any workplace, really. And that employers can support and encourage from that perspective. I also just want to say one thing about disclosure and self-identification, because I do think there is a difference. I don't know if John and James will agree with me, but the way we think about it at Work Without Limits is that disclosure is for the purpose of requesting an accommodation to do your job, where self-identification can either be formally through a survey that your employer gives you, or it can be informally, just as part of the way that you identify as a person in the workplace. So it could be at, it could be, you know, different dimensions of any employee. So I think that there's a more formal definition of it around disclosure, and then, you know, just how you identify as an individual.
I tend to agree with that, Kathy. Disclosure and self-ID are different things, and it's the how and the reason that you're doing it. I tend to agree with that. You led right into my next question when you talked about support, you know, that environments need to be supportive, but how do you create an environment that is supportive of people who have disabilities? And especially people who have disabilities that are not apparent. So maybe they haven't disclosed a disability. So I'm gonna go ahead and start with you again, James. And Kathy, Robert, just kick in. John Robinson, kick in if you see fit, or I am gonna come to you after he's done. But James, would you give us an answer or your take on that question?
Yeah, I mean, I think to create that environment for us, and we talk about this a lot at Understood, is creating kind of an environment that I would say is as much as possible universally designed, right? And that doesn't just mean your physical facilities, right? That means the way that you interview, the way that you do performance feedback, right? The way that you gain feedback from your staff at the university, right? And that we do things traditionally through surveys or through traditional interviews, but sometimes we have people who learn differently, right? Visual learners, hands-on learners, right? And so the more that we can construct our systems, taking into account those different types of learning styles and those different types of approaches, right? The more we're going to be able to create this open environment. And I think John's great point of, you know, at a university, there's an opportunity because there is such diversity, but to encourage the diversity of thought, right? And just because we do behavioral interviewing, and if you don't give eye contact or you don't answer questions in exactly the way that the behavioral interview script says, right? Maybe we should reanalyze that, right? Maybe we should reanalyze the scoring system on that, or the way we give performance evaluations, right? In just checking the box or filling things out. Maybe we need to be a little bit more hands-on with some of those approaches. So again, I think it goes back to messaging, but also the way that we embrace that universal design, recognizing that people with invisible disabilities, right, are often bring differences, but bring, as we're talking about, huge strengths to the workplace as well. And I just want to pick up on one last thing that Kathy said that I think is, sometimes it's controversial in our world. I don't know if John and Kathy will agree, but for me, bringing in diverse talent, especially talent with disabilities, isn't about getting to equal, right? It's actually about advantage, right? It's about bringing in people who have a different approach, staff who have a different approach, and will make your university stronger. So when there's intentionality in recruiting and intentionality in building some of these systems in just a little bit of a different way, your university is going to be stronger because it's not equal, right? I won't say better, but it's definitely different, and sometimes we build from strength. So again, I think creating that open environment and thinking about things differently, like we do from a neurodiverse or a universal design approach, is key for people to take a look at.
Okay, so you talked about universal design and intentionality. Kathy, do you have, would you like to add to that?
I don't know if I have so much to, I'm not sure what my thoughts are about the universal design, but I definitely was relating to a lot of the things that James was saying. And when you first asked the question about how do you create an environment that is supportive of people with disabilities, the first thing that popped into my mind is, number one, you have to hire people with disabilities. You have to bring them into your organization, and not by mistake. It needs to be a deliberate effort to do that. And I think that it's smart before you do that to do some of the things that James and John and I think myself have already alluded to is, you know, you need to talk about these things within your organization. You need to provide training to your managers and your associates. And not just once a year in October for National Disability Employment Awareness Month, but all year round, a consistent effort to really raise the comfort level of people around this topic. So they're not afraid to talk to people with disabilities, and they know clearly what the policy and procedure is within their organization. If and when somebody does ask for an accommodation, they know what to do with that, and they feel comfortable with that, and they feel competent with that. So that's sort of what I was thinking. And I know, Donna, you mentioned in your introduction that you lead your ERG within your organization. And I think that's a great best practice for organizations to do, to have that consistent effort and to engage people with disabilities as well as allies in this effort to really bring more awareness, more education, and a higher level of competence, a higher level of confidence around just including people with disabilities within the workplace.
Thank you, Kathy. And before we leave the topic of support, John, I wanted to give you an opportunity to jump in and just talk about support for individuals with disabilities in the workplace.
Yeah, I think that the key with, and Kathy alluded to this and said this before, that it's not about the disclosure, it's about the ability, right? What is it that you need to do your job and to perform your job function? That's what's key, right? It's about ability. That's why we name our company Our Ability, not Disability, because it's what you can do. And so when you focus on bringing in a diverse employment base and you include individuals with disabilities purposefully, as Kathy said, it's about what we bring to the table. And what we bring to the table is diversity in thought, diversity in experience. I can tell you any individual with a disability, whether it's visible or invisible, is an number one problem solver, because we've had to deal with an able-bodied world for our whole lives. And we're great at communicating our needs. And so when you focus on an employment base that's great at communicating their needs and great problem solvers, look to our community first. So the best support that you can do is to allow that conversation to happen. Talk about the ability, not the disability, and talk about how a reasonable accommodation can be made to hire that disability. That's really key. I'll give you an example. And this is something that's going on right now. I work in New York State. I'm in the state capitol, so I can see the state capitol here today. And as I mentioned before, we do a lot of work with a large corporation. And that large corporation asked me specifically, why does New York State not have a chief accessibility officer? Why do they not have a chief accessibility officer to support disability all the way down through New York State's operation? This company has a chief accessibility officer. Well, think about it from a university standpoint. Does your university or college have a chief accessibility officer? Do you? If you do, great. You probably don't. And if you don't, then you don't have the language and the top-down approach to disability in general. And so I would argue that every college, every community college, every university that can hear me should lead with disability at the top. Because then what will happen, you will have faculty across the board that will be inclusive and have disabilities. You will have students who are your consumers with disabilities that will come to you because they want to learn from the faculty with disabilities, and you'll be able to fundraise around disability. It is a magical opportunity for schools if you have a chief accessibility officer and lead top down. And I would urge all of you to consider that. And that's not something that's unique. I know that some of the schools that we're working with are starting to take that approach, so that they have at every school within their university somebody with a disability, because then it leans into opportunity, accessibility, and fundraising, because that's what we're all in, and we need to be aware of that. So consider and go to your provost or go to your chancellor and ask for a chief accessibility officer. You'd be better off for it.
Thank you, John. So a few of you talked about the top-down approach, that it takes support from the top. Let's bring it back down to employees and talk about the ERGs, or some institutions call them BRGs, but they're employee resource groups. How do you help create ERGs to support the inclusion program, especially when everyone is working remotely? I know, James, you mentioned, what does inclusion look like? We're all remote. I'm going to start with you again on this question and then go around. But can you speak on how institutions can help create ERGs to support a diversity and inclusion program when everyone's here, there, everywhere? What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key, I know everybody runs ERGs a little bit differently in BRGs. I think the key to a successful ERG is having meaningful purpose for that ERG, right? And also empowering that ERG. I know, again, we're going back up to the top, right? But allow the university leaders valuing what that ERG has to say. Same in corporate America, right? That if the ERG just gets together and talks a little bit about disability, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But if the ERG is empowered to start looking at some strategic components, how the university becomes more accessible, as John's saying, or how we get more talent, and is empowered to take on some true and real decisions within that university, and builds off that, I think that will build momentum. That'll build empowerment for both the people with disabilities in the university and their allies, right? And the allies that would be included in that. So having that meaningful place and taking that seriously. And again, I think that speaks to how do universities look at all their ERGs, right? Is there meaningful representation, and is there kind of meaningful work that can be done? The other thing I did mention on the front, but I also would say is, I think one of the things that ERGs can help lead is training for the university on disability awareness, or and again, I hate the term disability aware. I don't hate it, but the disability awareness is so overused, right? I think it's about inclusion and about different disability topics. I love John's approach of the university leaning into disability, and I think the ERG can lead that if they're empowered. So that's kind of my.
And Kathy, I'm going to ask you to follow up on that this time. And if you would unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. I think that, BRGs and ERGs can be very powerful within organizations. Definitely think that it's a best practice. I think that, with COVID-19 and many of us working in remote environments, I think we've learned that we can do practically everything remote. I think that can apply as well to BRGs and ERGs. And I think that a lot of them, with global companies, national companies, they have been operating their ERGs and BRGs already pre-COVID remotely to engage employees and associates, across their entire enterprise. I think that it could be an opportunity to reach people that maybe we haven't reached before, because they can access the activities and the meetings of the ERG remotely, where maybe they couldn't before due to transportation or schedules or whatever it may be. At the same time, I think we have to be careful. I think we have to make sure that we are using platforms that are accessible to people who use screen readers, that we're live captioning meetings, and just simply paying attention to the chat box, because that may be something, a way that people prefer to communicate, or it's the best way for them to communicate. So I think that it's, it could be an opportunity for BRGs to even have a bigger reach and to include more people in the work that they're doing. And also, I would just like to say as well, James brought it up, ERGs can affect talent acquisition for sure, and be a partner for organizations in recruiting talent, but also customers, products, services. And I think especially within the environment of higher ed, students as well, and engaging students also, because your students have disabilities as well, and they're going to become those prospective employees for these companies that are also disability inclusive. So you sort of have the whole, you're an employer, but you also have the talent that you can offer to companies as well. So I think there's, full faceted work for ERGs, especially within higher ed.
Thanks. And John, we're speaking about ERGs, but how have you been able to work in this remote environment?
Yeah, so we've done, I mean, a lot of this is here, right? It's on Zoom and on Teams and Google. We're doing all this work right now. I've spent the better part of the past 6 weeks sitting here in this chair talking to ERGs and BRGs around the country and being supportive of them. And in a way, it's a lot easier on me physically rather than, you know, being 3'8" and fighting with an airport and an airplane. And I am, in an awful way, so happy that I am not doing that and doing it here. But it does give us an opportunity to connect more and maybe in a more level playing field, considering Kathy's screen reader and accessible technology. But honestly, this is a lot easier for me physically to connect this way than in another way. And so when we're dealing with, you know, talking to an ERG or BRG this month in October, because a lot of them have the meetings now, you know, the things that we're saying is utilize this technology, expand your business resource group around disability because of technology, and then get involved in the greater disability community with your ERG or BRG and use technology to do so. And so then the companies will say, what do I mean? Well, how many virtual road races have you seen? Some of the former 5Ks that are happening around your communities that can't happen anymore. Well, why not get involved with one, do it in the name of disability BRG or ERG and fundraiser for that organization, right? You get up, you get active, you get out, and you wear your t-shirt and you're, you know, proud of your school and your BRG, and you're doing something in the community with people with disabilities. I think there's ways that we can do it. We just have to be really smart about utilizing technology, utilizing the advantages of technology, which do lead really well at times with the disability community. And I think we have to be open to that.
Thank you, John. And you raised a really good point. And I do want to give James and Kathy a chance to talk about the outreach into the greater disability community from your institution. Do you have any input to that? You know, that's kind of off the script, but I'd like to know more about that as well. Kathy?
Kathy, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, sure. So we do provide direct services to individuals with disabilities as well. And I may have missed that in my, you know, opening remarks, but we provide benefits counseling services to job-seeking individuals and employed individuals with disabilities and help them to transition from receiving public benefits to self-sufficiency, supporting themselves through employment. And even the training that we provide to employers and employment service providers, I mean, overnight practically we went virtual. All of our training now is offered virtually, and all of our direct services are offered virtually. That being said, and I agree with John, you know, not having to drive places really is a time saver. And it is, you know, it is easier on people, and it does eliminate that barrier to either accessing employment or accessing services. We are more reliant on technology, but I also think we have to remember that not everybody has equal access to technology either.
Great point.
Because of economics or because of where they live, maybe in a rural community where there isn't Wi-Fi, or maybe they just don't have the equipment, or maybe they don't know how to use the technology. So I think we have to be, you know, careful and remember that as well.
Great. And James?
Yeah, so when we work with corporations, both at Understood and in my private practice, we've kind of created what we call a 3-tier recruiting and outreach model for talent. Just quickly, the first tier of that is outreach depending on the geography and where the positions are going to be, and sometimes now they can be national but basically tier 1 is outreaching to what we would call traditional vocational rehabilitation organizations or disability organizations. So vocational rehabilitation, some great, Kathy, the Disability Inn, a lot of those great organizations that are out there in our space already, Easter Seals, the ARC, a lot of those. So that's one that we advise the folks that we support when they're recruiting talent with disabilities. But we did a study at Understood, and we found that probably somewhere between 10 and 15% of the talent of folks with disabilities out there are actually in the system, in the disability system. So part of a recruiting and outreach strategy, in our opinion, is also then doing tier 2 is what we call non-traditional outreach, right? Being able to partner with religious organizations, being able to partner with the YMCA, with parent organizations, with other industry associations where talent is, and people with disabilities are also a part of that, right? Bringing your disability message in as a university into those non-traditionals. That's tier 2. And then tier 3 is all the wonderful, utilizing all the wonderful tools that are out there online and virtually, right? John, you're talking, bringing all that together, right, in a virtual world from a recruiting and talent matching, using those sources in a productive way. Also, though, utilizing social media and making sure that your messages of disability empowerment are getting out on social media so your university is recognized more and more in our space. That will help to draw talent to you, right? There was a couple weeks ago, 60 Minutes had a 20-minute session with Anderson Cooper on neurodiversity and from talking about employing folks with autism, right? That brings visibility, that brings spotlight, right? And if your university does outreach like that, it also can bring visibility. So those are our 3 tiers: traditional, non-traditional, and virtual recruiting, that we believe the talent is out there.
Thank you, guys. Since we're talking about virtual, and a lot of this has come because of COVID. So how has COVID and the virtual work environment impacted the hiring and retention of people with disabilities? Now, is this a problem or an opportunity? Who'd like to go first with this? Kathy, go ahead.
I'll go first. What came to mind with that question is, the remote work and the telecommuting. This is something that the disability community has been advocating for years. And now all of a sudden, even at my organization, was working from home was never really embraced. And then on March 15th or March 16th, all of a sudden, in a 24-hour period, the whole organization is working from home. And all of a sudden, wow, we can do it. It would have taken us, without the pandemic, probably forever to transition to a remote environment. So I think that there could be opportunity for people with disabilities now that maybe employers and organizations' eyes are open a little more to people can be productive, people can be connected. You don't need to see people in the physical presence of the office as much as maybe we thought we did in the past, and then people can still be engaged. And I think that, unemployment rates, people have been affected by COVID-19, and hopefully moving forward, employers will be able to just, have an open mind and include people back into their organizations, maybe with a little more flexibility, and be a little more accommodating going forward, maybe than they have been in the past.
Okay, John, is this an opportunity or a problem?
Both. It's both. Just like life. The problem is short term, and that is that we have to educate both the business community and we have to educate our community of people with disabilities. I'll agree with Kathy. We've been asking for this anyway. This is something that we wanted to do. And in my mind, this levels the playing field more for individuals with disabilities than ever before, but we also have to train and be ready for that. So what do I mean? Obviously, for a college educated individual with a disability, we're ready to go. We can work in a virtual environment. But if you're dealing with people with developmental disabilities and people that may not be college educated, we have to train around opportunities moving forward. Where it hurts is COVID has hurt the traditional entry-level physical positions that the disability community has been able to gather before. And so now we have to think differently, and we have to train around new opportunities, and then we have to be ready for those. And we are, but we need to be mind open to what the new world looks like. It was coming anyway. Automation in the next 5 to 10 years was going to take a lot of the jobs that people with disabilities had. And so we have to train around this anyway. Where it affects the colleges and the universities, though, you're more than likely hiring somebody with a college education anyway. So this is ready for us. It's ready-made, it's built. take advantage of the fact that we want to get to work and get on Zoom and Teams and move forward, and embrace it, and you'll be ready to go. I know that from our standpoint, we have 2 businesses that have listened to us and embraced it, and we have networking events here in the next 2 weeks for them, just to recruit people who will be virtual only, and that's great, and that's what we want to hear. Thanks,
John. And James, what do you have to say?
So on complete agreement, I think I would lean towards, at the end of the day, it's more of an opportunity than a problem. But since John and Kathy covered the opportunities really well, I'm going to bring up one more problem to think about at a university level, especially when we think about neurodiversity, right? When we think about folks who may be brilliant thinkers as part of your university, but maybe they struggle with the informal rules of the workplace, right? They struggle with the social kind of rules. One of the things we've seen when some of those individuals are moving from a physical space, right, where they understand their work routine, they understand the interactions between the supervisor, between coworkers, and all of a sudden we're thrown onto Zoom. Right? And like, okay, so I'm in a department meeting. Now I'm on Zoom and I'm looking at a square, 12 squares. What do I do when I want to say something? Do I raise my hand? Do I interject? Do I have to wait for my boss? You know, and it's hard for all of us, right? I mean, to adjust to this in different formats, from these great panels to very large meetings to one-on-one, right? So we have to help define that, right? Having more structure and scripted rules about meetings, about interactions, right? It helps everybody, but it'll especially help those folks from an invisible disability or neurodiversity perspective, right? So as much as you can structure up the expectations in different virtual formats, right? Beyond that, making sure the accessibility is met, but then structuring those expectations, I think, again, the more welcoming it's going to be, but especially from folks when you have neurodiverse talent.
That's excellent. And what I hear you all coming back to is universal design. You know, designing things that include everyone. It takes me back to the idea of the curb cuts. So curb cuts were put in for people to have accessibility on sidewalks with walkers and wheelchairs, but everyone uses them. I have children, well, they're older now. I use baby carriages there. I use suitcases. So it started out with the disability community, but it's accessible and useful for everyone. Virtual work, you know, that's something that the disability community has been championing. And now it took COVID to get us here, but it's useful for everyone. We have about 5 minutes left. So I'll ask the last question. Are there specific steps our institutions can take to reach more job seekers with disabilities, especially during the continued restrictions of the pandemic? So that leads right into, you know, how can our outreach reach more people with disabilities, especially in the time that we have now, and what we have to work with now? I'm going to start with you, Kathy, on that.
Yeah, thank you. I think some of this we have covered already. You know, you want to get that buy-in from the top executive at your organization. You want to build a foundation, provide training for your managers, your supervisors, your associates, raise that comfort level and confidence level of your staff. Making sure that your buildings are accessible, but also your technology in this remote environment is accessible, and that we are, you know, utilizing best practices in that regard. I think getting the message out there through websites, through the photos you use on your websites, through videos that you use, your policies, making sure that you are putting the message out there that you are disability inclusive. And I think building those relationships in the community with organizations that represent and support people with disabilities in their job searches. There are many of them. I think it was James or John listed them. John and I represent a couple of them. There's no excuse not to partner with an organization in the community. There are plenty of resources in the community to partner with and bring people in. That could be for a disability mentoring day. It could be for an internship. It could be for a temporary position. It could be for a full-time permanent position. You know, don't change what you would normally do. You want to check those references, make sure they're qualified, do a good interview, but you want to bring people into your organization who can bring diversity and thought and perspective. So those are some of the steps that I thought of, and I know that James and John are going to add to that very nicely.
I want to go to you, John. What do you have to add?
Yeah, I think it's two things, and it's something that Kathy said earlier, and something that I have invested a lot of time and money on. What Kathy said earlier is make it purposeful. You know, purposefully add people with disabilities into your organization. Make it intentional. Go hire a chief disability officer, a chief accessibility officer if you're a chancellor or high in the organization. And if you're not, champion that. Get the students behind you, get the ERG, BRG behind you. Lead with disability top down. I think it's so very important to be intentional, to reflect the community that you educate, because the community that you educate is inclusive of people with disabilities, and your administration, your employees, and your faculty should reflect that. So be purposeful in your hiring. And then secondly, what we do. I mean, we have spent a lot of time and effort to support great organizations like James's and Kathy's to build technology that will help all of us, that will assess skills, that will attract candidates, and that will match to job openings. We're excited about what we built because we know that technology is the way that we can build that bridge between individuals with disabilities and employment. So that's why we do what we do, and we're excited for it.
All right, James.
Yeah, so I mean, I think great answers, right? I think from an outreach standpoint in this world, it's about, as we said, it's about your virtual presence, right? Your social media presence, valuing disability in that. And then I think the last thing I would say is working with people who really understand solid technology and solid outreach. John, for example, outreaching to John about what are the best places to put in the job match searches, and where's the best place to put my job leads, right? Because I will caution folks a little bit as I'm saying virtual recruiting, but there are some job boards out there that quote unquote have a disability focus, but probably don't have the best reputation and even maybe the best intention. So work with experts, contact John, right? Contact us at Understood, right? And work with experts because if you can build that presence in a solid and meaningful way, that'll get talent your way.
All right. It is about that closing times, but I do want to give each of you an opportunity if you have anything else to add. If you'd like to add something at this point. Kathy, do you have something?
Well, I think that, remember, as institutions of higher ed, remember your students. Encourage your career services offices to also be inclusive of your students with disabilities. Partner with your disability services offices and really build up, the future talent of America, to include students with disabilities and those talent pipelines for the employers and corporations that you work with.
Okay. James or John? James?
So I would just thank you for having us. Thank her for having us on the panel. Thank you. My last statement would be for those folks who want more information about invisible disabilities, and especially the 1 in 5, go to understood.org. There's a lot of strategies on inclusion and support, especially in an education environment of both students and staff. So thanks for having us.
Thank you. And John?
I would just say thank you, Donna. I mean, this is a great panel. James and Kathy are very well respected, and I think a lot of them. And it's great to have this conversation, and it is important. Universities, schools, colleges, community colleges can be leaders, and this is something that, as a person with a disability, I would like to see very much. I can remember being a university student and not seeing faculty with disabilities and wondering why I was there. So, be purposeful in this, and I think we can get there collectively.
I think that's a great statement to end this panel on. I'd like to thank the three of you. I'd like to also thank Gilda Paul, who is our representative at Princeton in HERC. And just to mention to all of the people who are listening in on this panel, use your resources. There are 3 resources here, and I'm sure they're open for you to reach out to them. Thank you, and I hope you got something out of it, and enjoy your day. Thank you all, and have a great day.